All right, so we're here at CES, and we've been looking at the digital conversations online. And Barry, what have you found on search?
Well, the one thing we found, one of the things that we put together a metric called Search Leaderboard, and what we did is, you can go and find their search rankings for any specific term, and there's lots of tools to do that, but to be able to go and look across a bunch of terms, say 50 different search terms, and see who dominates, who owns the most in search for those collection of keywords. And we did that with the top kind of 50 terms related to CES 2019, and came back with rankings across which organizations had the biggest presence there. And what we found is that the top 10, 20, even more than that, were on search results were really media entities. They were the people that would cover this, The Verge, CNET, but also places like Wikipedia, reference sites where they would wind up people would wind up editing the pages of different companies like Intel and others, so they'd be fast and furiously kind of updating the definitions based upon the announcement that those organizations were doing, because those are recent changes that really boosted Wikipedia way up into the rankings across those terms that we looked at. Brands didn't really start to appear until later on, into the third page of search results. So we had some brands like Faurecia and Intel and Nvidia start to poke through, mainly about their pages that were set up that were pre-announcing or getting ready to announce stuff that they were going to announce at the show. So organizations that got out there and put their pages up seemed to be the ones that were going to poke through.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's really similar to what we found in sentiment too, right?
Yeah.
Because when you look at the sentiment, what you found is it's mostly just neutral, which would track well with news coverage and things like that. When you looked at the negative portion of the conversation, though, it really kind of looked at a disbelief that what we're seeing is real, that we might see some vaporware in there, some of this stuff is so future looking that it's never going to hit the shelves.
Yeah.
And then there's this huge part of the conversation that's still really dominated by traditional news. It's just people reporting announcements and stories and launches and things like that. So it's really interesting that way.
Yeah, we took a walk around the floor yesterday on both the stands and then the main expo area. We saw a lot of commonality. I thought a lot of the same stuff. I can see it's got to be pretty hard for an organization to break through, and so that's being prepared, setting up your presence, not just here but on the web and in digital space, is probably really important to get the maximum value out of it.
Drones and nets.
Drones and
nets.
Yeah, drones, nets, and massage chairs. We saw there's a whole category of those things. But we saw a lot of companies here that, you wonder whether, is that something that's important for a company that's only going to spend money on the booth itself?
Right.
Are you getting the most out of it? Are you getting anything out of it if you don't do some additional promotion content surrounding it? I think maybe if you treat it like a one-time event and that's it, and not a content opportunity, then you might be missing some of the value.
And that's where we found some interesting stuff with influencers as well, which is, we looked at what the top 50 influencers are talking about, and they're still talking about gadgets and devices. They're talking about mobile devices, they're talking about TVs, they're talking about gadgets generally. And that really tracks with, maybe companies aren't doing enough with influencers to stand out and do something different that really kind of breaks through that noise.
Yeah, really making it almost, given how tough it is for reporters these days, making things easy for them to put together a story is probably important. The idea of being able to set up something that they can go to and it has tentacles to other things, or activities that mean something, that's important probably for journalists. They don't have a lot of time. We could see how much ground they have to cover here physically to get from place to place. It's a really hard job that they have to cover all this stuff.
Yeah.
So anything to make them more efficient. The other thing we did is, we talked about we do a survey. We did a consumer survey leading up to CES. We did it last year and we did it this year. And really, we didn't really find a lot of change in preferences in terms of excitement. We might have seen a slight dip. Mobile is still the number one thing that people kind of are interested in. Handsets, phones, it still was number one. It took a slight dip from last year, but nothing really outside of the margin of error in the survey that we did. But we did see across the board home related things kind of creep up a little bit, between 1 and 2 percentage points. So there was that slight shift. It's debatable whether it be outside the margin of error, but we did see a slight shift. We'll see what happens next year.
Yeah, and it's interesting, given how much money and effort's being put into smart cities and smart health and technology for families. It's really interesting that that's a huge part of CES now, but still from a conversational standpoint, it's just a tiny fraction of what's going on.
It really is, yeah. I mean, there's the mainstays. I think we looked at, the display folks like TCL and other ones, and Samsung. They really just have the whole installation thing down. They created the other kind of neat thing that we saw here that I thought was a pretty good idea to do is to get people, you don't have to be in the hall to actually have a great space. And we saw BMW, we saw that space yesterday. Excellent, idea, creating a whole immersive experience with a temporary building they built in the parking lot.
Yeah, it's easy to stand out when you're not among everybody else.
Yeah,
right?
and it really gets you away from the noise. And granted, those are big investments, but I think those who made the bigger investments probably got the most value out of things this year.
All right, well, that's us from CES.
Yeah, see you next year.